Welcome to the Chess Angle. My name is Neil. I am the founder and director of the Long Island Chess Club in New York. This podcast is all about chess, tournament play, and improvement at the amateur and club level. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @thechessangle. This podcast is sponsored by Chessable. I know many of you are already using Chessable, but for those who haven't yet, their courses are phenomenal. Chessable uses science-backed learning and the concept of spaced repetition to increase retention and ensure that you're learning the material. Check out chessable.com today. There's a link in the show notes. For this interview episode, I spoke with fellow New York amateur chess player and my friend, Jay Kleinman. Jay is a Class A player with a USCF rating of 1915. He shared some great stories from his time on the amateur chess scene, including beating some now famous GMs when they were up and coming. Jay also shared some thoughts on his approach to the game, including some ideas about chess improvement. Amateur players of all levels should find this to be an engaging conversation. My chat with Jay begins right now. Hey Jay, what's up? How you doing? Welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you coming on.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me. It's actually quite a privilege to be here. I've heard a lot about the show. I would have liked to plug my book, but unfortunately I didn't know I'd be on, so I didn't write the book. But I'm hoping after I retire that I will write a book, and then you'll have to have me back on so I can
Absolutely.
plug it.
You got it. You always have a standing invitation.
Okay.
I appreciate it, Jay. So let me ask you,
Sure.
because we both work in professions with children. I'm a middle school music teacher. You work with kids in a different capacity. So maybe you could tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm a social worker. I direct home-based intervention programs for those with intellectual disabilities. So we provide, a wide range of services to kids and adults, in fact, throughout the city. So yeah, that's my thing. That's my primary job. I've been doing it a while. Love doing it. Love working with kids. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, are you playing in tournaments currently? I know you were playing at the Queen's Chess Club for a while, but I'm just wondering what your status is with that right now.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the Queen's Chess Club is currently suspended because we lost our site where we had been for about 12 years or so. So the site, needed the space. So we've been looking for another site, and so we're in the process of doing that. And then additionally, my time has been quite limited, so I haven't been able to devote a lot of time to the search. So we had about 3 people who were kind of running things there, and we all had to pull back, so it's made it a little more challenging. But to answer your question, yes, I am playing tournaments, but the proviso is it's somewhat limited. So right now I'm at the Nassau Chess Club because they're really convenient to me. They're 10-minute drive, if that. But I was tied for first place. We're coming up on round 3. Actually, no, round 3 was last night, I guess. But I had to take a bye. So there were only 2 perfect scores. It was me and one other player. And I had to take a bye last night because, I've got my son's Little League. He plays a lot of Little League. He plays AAU basketball. So he really keeps me busy in terms of the schedule. And, I think you're a dad, Neil. And there is kind of a window which gets smaller and smaller as the kids get older, where they kind of, it goes from they want you around and they want you around all the time. And then all of a sudden it turns very quickly to, kind of get away from me, that kind of thing. So, yeah, so so I'm trying to, I navigate the competing demands of being a dad and trying to play in tournaments. So I play in very little bit in tournaments.
No, it's a game changer. And I'm glad you spoke about that because, I am a father as well. And I think a lot of the improvers listening to this are in the same position. And it's like you said, the window gets smaller and smaller, but you still try to do it. You still try to play, but it becomes a balancing act for sure. Now, speaking of your tournament play, and this is one of the main reasons I wanted you on, because you have kind of a cool history. You have some cool war stories as far as playing at the amateur level. You were on like a 16 game win streak or something like that. It was like 14 wins and 2 draws, which at the amateur level, that's pretty remarkable because most people would not go that long without at least losing a game. So I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, well, it was unusual. Basically, I got into this streak. I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but all of a sudden, I was playing, I guess, a lot. This is back in 2016, around the spring and summer of 2016. I was playing at your club and at the Queen's Chess Club. And all of a sudden, I turned around as I'm looking through games in my score pad, and I'm like, wow, I haven't lost a game in a while. And sure enough, it lasted 16 games. A lot of those players, some of those players played at both clubs. It began, as I looked, I wrote it down. Yeah, so some of the players were, not as didn't have the rating that I had, so they were a bit lower rated than I was. Some of them were not, though. So I got some upsets there. I got some upset draws. I got, a bunch of guys that played at your club, and I don't know. It's just things came together for me. And it ended with, I played a master, a guy, Payam Parhami, and on his birthday, so he was allowed to beat me, because it was the guy's birthday. So Parhami beat me on his birthday, and that ended my 16-game streak. Yeah.
Now that's pretty cool. Now, do you remember, were you sort of in the zone? Like, do you remember your thought process, anything specific about the games that you attribute to this?
Well, there were some exciting games. There was some, at least one Queen Sacrifice, I know, which happened at your club. That was exciting. There was, two people from the same family, I think. You want me to say names, or?
I think it's fine. We're not giving away nuclear launch codes or anything.
Yeah, I don't think it's. So the Popkins, I think they moved out now. They're
good
moved
people,
to Florida,
very
or
good
something,
people.
I believe. Yeah. So I got, the father held me to a draw, and he was, I think, significantly lower rated than me. And then I beat his son, so I beat Simon. So that was interesting how that worked out. And he actually was the last win of the streak. So after that, I played Parhami, and that was the end of it. But I'd have to look back at the games. I mean, it might have just been a string of luck. Sometimes you just get into, you don't make like obvious blunders, and maybe your opponents do. Maybe there was some, again, because my playing time is always limited, there may have been some buys involved where I didn't get like those round 4 or round 5 pairings, which would have perhaps ended the streak sooner. So it might have just been some buys were involved in tournaments. For those that don't know, buys are where you don't play the game, you get a half point instead. That's, if you can't make the game. So, and my schedule, like I was saying, it makes it difficult to complete tournaments often for me.
It's funny you say that about buys, because I'm a fan of strategically taking buys. Like, in other words, if you're just tired and not feeling it, I think in some ways you're better off just not playing. Or if it's a major weekend event with those back-to-back games, I think the rest is actually good.
Yeah. I haven't done that. I've kind of, I don't really take strategic buys. I take buys because I can't play. So that's always like, last night couldn't play. My son had a playoff game, so I had to go to that, so I couldn't, I didn't want to miss that. But otherwise, yeah, it's, what can I say? It was a great run. And it was my DiMaggio streak, the 14 wins and 2 draws.
Now, when you play, let's talk about this a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you use the same openings? Are you like me, where you have your pet openings and you stick with it, or do you mix it up?
Yeah, and I think my experience is most tournament players are like that. It's the exception who, play something different, who really changes it up. What I see, when I'm playing is that, somebody, if it's somebody I've played before, they're generally going to play the same opening. And I'm the same. The only variation for me is that if I'm playing someone who's significantly lower rated than me, then I will play. I will sometimes play different openings. I will play, for instance, if I'm playing. I'll give the secrets because I play so infrequently now that it doesn't matter. If I'm playing, if I have white and somebody plays the French against me, everybody knows pretty much I'm an E4 player. So if somebody plays the French against me and they're significantly higher rated, I go into the exchange because I just feel that's, I'm better off there. Let them, let's trade some stuff off. Let's go into boring positions and see you beat me. And that's worked out for me. So I've scored some draws. I've scored some victories when they've overextended. If I'm playing somebody who perhaps is significantly rated lower than I am, I don't tend to play the exchange. I'll play something else. I'll keep some pieces on. Another example I used to play a lot, the King's Indian attack is white, so E4, D3, that kind of stuff. So I used to play it all the time. That was like, the only thing I played. And then I decided I would start playing that against lower rated players. I'm not sure what was my thinking on that? Well, I just figured, I guess at that time, this was going back a while, but I felt that, keeping pieces on, was just a better route for me in the King's Indian attack. So I would play that opening. But if I'm playing someone, I think, lower rated, then I tend to, if you play, I don't know what the specifics are, but I won't want to exchange things off necessarily. If I'm playing somebody low rated, that's my tendency.
It's funny you mentioned the exchange because I play the French defense only as black against E4. Most people know that. And it's funny how the amateur level is different from playing at the grandmaster level, because at the GM level, most of the time you're not going to see the exchange variation because it tends to be drawish, but yet at the amateur level, it can be very effective. And in some ways, it probably doesn't matter because at this level, there are so many mistakes by both sides either way. But I just think that's interesting that you're playing an exchange, which at the amateur level is perfectly playable. But, if you look at like the super-GMs, when they do the French, they're going to do like the classical variation. They're not going to trade off. They're not going to trade off. They're going to defend that pawn.
Right. And I think one of the drawbacks when people study chess is that they will, when amateurs are looking at chess, they want to do what the super-GMs are doing. And this, your typical amateur player has almost nothing in common with a super-GM. So whatever applies to the super-GM is not going to apply to an amateur. So you're not going to go into 30-move deep theory generally. The super-GMs are not going to be playing the French exchange by and large, although there are, of course, some exceptions, as there always is in chess. Right. Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you about an opponent you had at the club, because I recently did an episode on distracting behavior. So I'm going to bring up, you probably know which incident I'm going to bring up. So you had a player who was probably 1800, and he sits down, and I guess in some lame attempt to psych you out, he goes, "Hi, I'm a beginner."
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. So the truth is of that is that I was lazy. So we sat down to play, and I asked him, which is something I've always done, I guess. I'd like to know the rating of the person I'm going to play, because as we just learned, it affects my openings. But I was lazy in this instance. So instead of getting up and looking at the wall chart where the rating would be posted, I asked him. So I said, "What's your rating?" And he said, "Oh, I'm a beginner." So, okay, yeah. So, and I foolishly believed him. And then, of course, he's like 1800 strength. I don't remember what his rating was, but he was certainly a Class A level strength player. And so that threw me a bit, because then, I'm playing. I think that this guy, since he's a beginner, just learned the moves, that he's going to be, an easy kill for me. And that wasn't the case at all. So he was a really tough player. And by the time I figured that out, I was lost. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, there were a few things with this guy. So he's he's no longer with us, shall we say?
Right. At the club.
At the club.
At your club.
Yeah, no, he's here. Yeah,
Right.
he's here on the planet.
Yeah.
He's no longer at the club, though. That's funny.
Right. But I think, on the topic of distractions, you just kind of have to try to tune them out. There are players who are piece bangers, clock bangers, that kind of stuff. And I think I'm pretty good at tuning that out. So
you're probably better at than I am. I just say something.
Yeah.
I just get impatient. I usually let it go once, and if it continues, and then usually they stop because apparently a lot of people don't say anything, which I'm all about being non-confrontational. But if your opponent is doing something to distract you, see, my attitude is this: if they're doing something to the point where it's affecting my play, where I feel like I'm not bringing my A game, then I'm going to say something.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it's something
and
that,
of course, it's against the rules.
If it's something that's tolerable, it might be something else. But all right, so let's go to the when they were kids segment, so to speak. So you have an interesting history against some now famous players when they were kids.
Yeah, when they were kids. That's the big qualification. So first, let me start. I started playing chess. I'll get up here. This is where I cut my teeth. Marshall Chess Club.
He's showing a Marshall Chess Club T-shirt.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, some of these people are listening, right? Yeah. So, so the Marshall is where I started playing, and I started playing in the late '80s, and played there. That was my club. That was almost my exclusive club for like 10 years. I started out in something called the Monday Under 1600. So that was the tournament that I started in. But okay, so we're talking about the kids, right? So I played, let's see, which one was first? Let me see, I put them out here. And actually it's quite timely because the FIDE candidates, as you know, is going on right now. And I played two of those guys. So two of the guys that are playing in the candidates, which is the tournament to select the next challenger to the world champion, I played them at the Marshall. So in January of '97, I got paired with none other than Hikaru Nakamura, who's making his big comeback now. So he had been retired for a couple of years. He was, making the big money streaming and all of that. And now he's come back into competitive chess and doing amazingly well, qualified for the candidates. So way back in '97, Hikaru was, how old? I think he's about 10 years old. He was rated 1715. So that's scary right there. A 10-year-old rated 1700. And then I was about 1960 at the time. I was probably close to my peak. And we got paired and I drew him. So we had a draw. So, which, I didn't think anything of it back then. But then years later, Nakamura everywhere. You can't go anywhere without hearing about Hikaru Nakamura. So that was really cool. So we ended up, and the other thing is it's so unusual because, Nakamura, I think, is well known for, being an aggressive fighting player. And here we ended up with a draw. It was pretty even. I think that he had a slight advantage at one point, but then he, made a bad move and I was able to hang on and split the point with him. So that was pretty cool. So then another one we had, just the candidates people. My other person that I played, who's playing in the FIDE candidates now, is Fabiano Caruana. So he's a one-time challenger. He played Carlsen for the World Chess Championship and lost a very, very tight match. So I played him back in April of 2000. Fabiano was 7, but he was going on 8. He was going to be 8 in like a couple of months.
That makes all the difference.
Yes,
That's huge.
It wasn't so bad. Yeah, but he was he was this 7-year-old, almost 8, who was rated 1466 when I played him, and back then I was down to about 1760. So my rating always fluctuates back and forth. And we played this game. It was hysterical because he's this little kid. And, he had to pretty much stand up at the board or sit on his knees just to see the board. And this was I think it was a weekend tournament, a April Grand Prix tournament at the Marshall. And Fabiano would make his move like instantly. He would just sit down, make his move, hit the clock, and then walk around and look at the other games. So that's what he wanted to do. So, I get, because he had so much energy. He was, 7 years old. And then me, I would sit at the board and I'm like, like this. I'm laboring over my moves every time it's my turn to move. And then I would make a move. Fabiano would come back immediately, see that I made a move. He would make his move instantly, hit the clock, and then walk around and look at the other games. So this kid, and he's playing me even, So, I mean, who knows what would have happened if he actually sat down and looked at the game. So this went on for quite a while, and then I guess on about the 30th move or so, he makes one fast move too many. So he basically, he protected a piece with another piece, but he missed that there was a pin involved. So he lost a piece. So he kind of hung a piece. I took the piece, and he looked, and he immediately realized he blundered. And he stopped the clock and he shook my hand. He was very gentlemanly, just so mature beyond his years is what I would have to say. He, you wouldn't expect a 7-year-old kid to act like that. But he was very, no tears. He wasn't emotional at all. He just stopped the clock, shook my hand, and that was it. So I've always joked that if Fabiano ever wins the world championship, I'm going to claim the title by virtue of the transitive property, right? So if, Fabiano beats Magnus and I beat Fabiano, therefore, the
Absolutely.
rest, right?
There you
So,
go.
yeah.
We'll have
Absolutely.
a special episode.
It's unimpeachable.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he had the inner fortitude of, the proper mental attitude and the focus and the maturity even at that age. Wow.
I got some more. So I got Irina Krush, who has by far the best name for a chess player one could ever have. Krush, come on. So although I've heard that it's actually pronounced Krush, Irina Krush, but no one calls her Irina Krush. It's So Irina was about 10 years old. I got paired with her. Actually, we played twice at the Marshall. I think this was the Wednesday under 2000. I had graduated by this time from the Monday under 1600. I'd gone up to the Wednesday under 2000 tournament. And Irina what was Irina? I don't know if I have that here. She was something like 1700. So she was a 10-year-old 1700 player. And she played, she was, what was she? She was white. She played the Queen's Gambit, which of course, it's so in now after the Netflix show. But so we played Queen's Gambit. I think there was an exchange, again, 2 games. They both developed the same way. And then she played the minority attack against me, which, for people not familiar with that, that's basically white uses white has a minority on the queen's side, 2 pawns against black's 3 pawns. And then white advances her pawns to try and weaken, I think generally my black C pawn. So I was amazed at this, 10-year-old girl who is playing in such a positional manner. It's such an incredibly boring and sophisticated way to play. So, to go for like a minority attack. And she did well, but, I was, I guess at that time I was something like, 150, 200 points higher than her. And, I managed to beat her both times, but I was really impressed with her play. And at the end of the games, people often, I think this might be a lost art, outside of the Marshall maybe, or these days, I don't know. But I used to have post-mortems all the time. You'd go over the game. Nowadays, it's hard because, clubs don't have the space often for people to go over the game. So the Marshall had plenty of space at that time. You could go to another room or whatever and go over the game with your opponent. And that's how players learn and they improve in getting feedback from their opponent. So I did this with Irina, and her father was there, of course. And Irina really had no interest at that time in going over the game. She had a children's book with her, which she was looking at. And she was more interested in the children's book. And I ended up doing the post-mortems with her dad, which was pretty cool. I just thought it was great. But Irina was, she was just, this adorable 10-year-old girl that played really, really good chess. And I had a sense with all these people, Certainly with Fabiano. I'm not sure I had the sense with Nakamura, but definitely with Fabiano and with Irina, I knew that these were players that were going to go very, very far, and I'd be hearing about them again someday. Yeah. And Irina, of course, for those that don't know, she won the U.S. Women's Chess Championship multiple times. Yeah.
Wow. I feel like my tournament history is so boring compared to...
Well, it's all the place. If you were at the Marshall in the 80s and the 90s, you saw, you played with these people. You rubbed elbows with them. Yeah.
No, that's great stuff. And now I hear you had a situation where you mistakenly prepared to give a lesson to a famous grandmaster.
Yeah. And I actually wrote about this in New in Chess, the big international chess magazine, when they did an article on this individual. But I've located since that, I think I wrote a letter to the editor just after they did their article, and I did I basically related this story to the New in Chess readers. But in preparing for this, I actually found the original notes on what happened. So basically what happened, I was playing in a, what was this? I think it was an under 16, was it? No, it was an under 2000. So I was playing a Wednesday under 2000 back in 1990. I was playing my friend Charles Crouppen. He was an attorney, the late Charles Crouppen. He was a great guy. We'd matched up many times together. He was usually about 1700. I was about 1800, something like that. And we were pretty evenly matched, so we would have very exciting games for some reason. I don't know why. So anyway, so we play a game. I'm playing with Charles Crouppen, and basically we get into this end game, which looks kind of even, but I see a situation for a trap. So basically it's a rook and pawn end game, and I sacrifice a pawn with check. So I allow Crouppen to play rook takes pawn check. But the trick is that and he jumped at it, which I think a lot of players that level would. So he played rook takes pawn check, but when I moved my king out of check, it set up a mating net, amazingly, around his king. So he plays rook takes, people don't look for that. They see a check where they can win material. Most people are going to do that. They figure, okay, that's a no-brainer. So I moved my king out of the check, and now his king is trapped. It's in a mating net, and he has no defense against me shifting my rook over and mating him. So he resigns. And what happens is, for the last, 10 moves of the game or something, this older gentleman sits down next to us, and he's watching the game. And, he's watching very carefully. When the game is over, he comes up to me and he says, "Did you write down that score on a carbon sheet?" Which, where you have two copies. I said, no. And, I just used my regular score pad. And then he said, "Would you mind if I wrote out a copy of your score sheet?" So I'm like, "Sure, yeah, absolutely." And then he asked me, "Is it neat?" And I'm like, "No, I've been told many times I have like a doctor's handwriting. So it is not neat." So then I said, "It's probably better if I just write it out for you." And he says, "Thanks, I'd appreciate that." So then I begin writing, and I said, "Can I ask what this is for?" As I'm writing out the moves. And he says, "I'm studying the end game." This is what he says, "I'm studying the end game." So now I figure he's like a novice who's really interested in chess, and he'd like to learn some things. So I was about to offer. Well, I did offer. I offered to show him the game. So I said, "Okay, well, I can go over this with you. We can go over all the moves." He says, "Great, And then I figured, but, before I do this, and I'm feeling great about myself because I just beat somebody with a nice trap in the end game. And so, if Crouppen had beaten me, I probably would have told this guy to get lost, but, or maybe he would have gone up to Crouppen. But, So I tell the guy, "Yeah, sure, I'll go over this with you, but, can you just give me what did I ask him? I said, "What's your rating?" Yeah, so I just, can you tell me your rating? So then I want to structure the lesson in such a way that, it's beneficial for, my new student here. And he looks at me, he says, "I'm about 2,500. So I sit back in my chair, I'm about to teach this guy, and I'm like, 2,500. So now I'm like, okay, I must know who this person is if I hear his name. So I said, "What's your name?" And I'm like shell shocked. And he says, "Lombardy." So I'm like completely stunned at this point, So here I am looking pretty foolish. I'm about to teach a lesson to Bobby Fischer's second. Okay, so this is the guy who helped Bobby Fischer prepare for his match in Iceland against Boris Spassky, and who was with Fischer during that match, went over the games with him, all that kind of stuff. So now I'm like totally thrown. A chess legend, Grandmaster William Lombardy, wants to see my game. So we shook hands, he signed my score sheet, and we went over the game. And the guy was charming. He was very, so here I was supposed to be the teacher. Of course, I turn around, then I'm the student. He analyzed the game with me, and he complimented me on the trap. And he said that he was collecting examples. He was going to write a book, actually, on endgames, I guess. And he wanted to, he was going to include this in his book. And so he went over the game with me. He, again, just a very funny guy. So at one point, I had my knight was on c3. I moved it to b5 to threaten something, who knows what. And then when it got chased almost immediately from b5, and it went back to c3. And I guess it could have gone to d4, because he, at that point in the game, he looks at me when the knight goes back to c3, and he goes, I see you're planning to go knight b1 next, and he's like teasing me. He's like, what are you doing with your knight? So I'm like undeveloping my pieces. Yeah, so he complimented me, said it was a really cute theme, and he said that he was going to put it in his book. Lo and behold, people have plans and all that kind of stuff. And I would see Lombardy, Grandmaster Lombardy, now and then afterwards at the Marshall, and I'd ask him, did you write that book? And no, he hadn't written the book. And lo and behold, I don't believe he ever did. So, but still, a great story.
That's fantastic. Well, you do have to, you were joking in the beginning, but you do need to write this stuff in a book, and then we'll have you back on.
Yeah, after I retire, I'll put down my war stories in a book, definitely.
But it's like you said, when you play at the Marshall and places like that, you're bound to run into a certain crowd that you're not going to see at like a local club, let's say. So very cool. Now, let's talk about playing online, because that whole landscape and the popularity of that has changed with the pandemic. Do you play online a lot? Did you find yourself playing online with the pandemic?
Unfortunately, I do. So what happened is I did very little in the past because I'm not or I have to change it now. I was not a fan of blitz chess, 5 minute, where each side has 5 minutes to make all their moves. I felt it's very superficial and all that kind of stuff. Lo and behold, the pandemic comes along, all the chess clubs shut down, and you have no option really other than to play blitz online, so to try and keep some semblance of staying sharp. So I started playing a lot of blitz. It became addictive. It has its pluses and minuses. I mean, for the, on the plus side, I think it can make you pretty solid in your openings. So as long, in the openings that you play. So it can, and the reason I say that is because I find that when I'm playing, classical over-the-board chess, I don't really see the same openings. For the most part, they're playing different stuff. But in blitz chess, so I feel pretty confident about my openings. I can gain a lot of time on the clock. And blitz is all about the clock. Chess is less of a factor in blitz. You can be down ridiculous amounts of material and still win if you're quick. So it was all, we could do back in the, when the pandemic was, happening and the clubs were shut down. So yeah, it's addictive. It's, it kind of makes you feel bad, I think, because you feel like you've wasted a lot of time. I can't I play on my phone. I cannot put the phone down if I lost the game. So I need to win the last game before I can put the phone down. But that's problematic because then I could lose 10 in a row, and I'm feeling worse.
It's the just one more game syndrome.
Right. It's like a gambler. Yeah. So but I can't put the phone down if I've lost. I don't care, where I am. But, so I got to finish with a win. But I still think it can. I mean, Grandmaster Delugi, he had a column I think in New in Chess, or was it Chess Life? I'm not sure now. I think it's New in Chess. But anyway, he had a column on Blitz, and he swears by Blitz. That Blitz is a great way to go. And again, I think it has its pluses and its minuses. But on the minus side, I think it can encourage superficial play. So things you're just playing for traps. So I have to be really careful when I go back to playing in, as I have gone back to playing in tournaments, the little bit that I do, I have to be really careful about not, about taking time. I mean, I still try to play the opening quickly. I shouldn't be puzzled on openings, I feel, at the 1900 level that I'm at right now. I should pretty much figure out openings quickly. But I have to stay away from, moving too quickly, playing too superficially, playing hope chess, things that I tell my students about.
Yeah. Oh, so you are teaching chess privately, Jay?
Oh, yeah. So I will teach privately. I mean, I started teaching a long time ago. St. John's University had a chess class in their continuing education program. So I was teaching chess for beginners there, I guess for a couple of years. Then I moved on. Then I didn't actually teach for a long time, but then I got into I taught in a place called the Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning in Jamaica, Queens. So I was an instructor there. I had a Saturday class. But my schedule didn't really, I did that for a couple of years, much more recently than the St. John's job. But then, I was missing things on the weekends with my kids, so I didn't like that. So I had to stop that. Private lessons were, was much, it was a better situation for me because I could set the time, that kind of thing. So that was just better for me. And at one point, I guess, sometime before the pandemic, I was really busy. I had students just about every night of the week. And of course, with my regular full-time job, I could only do it evenings. I was doing some weekend. I had some students on weekend. So I was doing a lot of this. But then again, missing a lot of time. So I started being a little bit more picky about, students I was taking. And then the pandemic helped greatly with that because I pretty much shut everything down. I stopped doing my house calls. And now, I've got some students now, but not a lot. I do it for the enjoyment. It's a pleasure for me to teach motivated people who are interested in learning chess. Sometimes, with teaching, I would have students where the mother or the father, whoever, had the kid taking judo on Monday, piano on Tuesday, chess was Wednesday, and so on. And those kids generally are not into it. They're doing it because mom wants them to do it. And I have a harder time, I think, with those kids because, I try not to take those students because, I want students where it's more intrinsic, where they're interested in learning. So, and then I've learned things from students. I mean, they've told me, the names of openings, from very motivated students that are really into chess. So I'll have, the first time I learned about something called the Traxler counterattack, I think it is. I never knew this. I never knew this variation existed, and I learned it from a student, so sometimes the students teach you. I learned it's something called, Bowden's mate. And I've actually had Bowden's mate in games. I've mated people with this mating pattern with two bishops. I never knew it had a name, so you live and you learn. The students teach too.
That's it. What is it? I think from the King and I, when you're a teacher, from your students, you'll be taught, right? So
that's right. Very good. Yeah.
All right, cool. So let me ask you about, Jay, playing versus studying. Let's get into a little bit more on chess improvement. Do you feel one is more important than the other? Is it a balance? Are there certain things you kind of have to play through? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it has to be a balance. I mean, that I think works best because you can, if you want to get better, you can study all you want, but you need to then test what you've learned. You need to test that knowledge.
Yep.
So I think it's a mix. I mean, myself, I have tended to alternate between, I tend not to do them both at the same time. I don't know why, but I'll play or I'll study. I don't necessarily do both during the same periods. But in my studying, it's not so much, I'll do a little bit of opening stuff. I have like some pet lines that I'll, kind of bone up on. But mostly I read books that really change, one's approach to chess. And for me, it was books like John Watson's books, Modern Chess Strategy, Secrets of Modern Chess Strategy. He wrote 2 books, which I thought were great.
Both
and
classics.
basically, tells you it highlights how, for me, what Watson highlighted is that you can have all the rules you want in chess, but the issue with chess is that it's the exceptions. It's the exceptions to the rules. So you can have crazy positions where material is just totally one-sided, but then if you've got the better position, if you've got a great attack or whatever it is, the exceptions dominate over the rules themselves.
Yeah.
So in terms of improving what I started with, I would play. I had a Fidelity Chess Challenger, I think, a little tabletop computer. I started in the prehistoric days before of engines and online chess and all of that. I had chess computers. I would play against the chess computers, notch it up a level each time. I would look at the games afterwards. So it's the same stuff I tell my students. Go over your games. Don't use the computer to don't put your game into an engine and have it analyze it for you, because you're not going to get anything out of that. Although I still, I'll see strong players doing that, but they'll just, I guess they're not patient. They don't want to wait. They just want to figure out the answer right there.
That's me.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They just.
No, I know what you're saying. It does, and Grandmaster Romain Edwards said the same thing. I know for me though, studying, and again, there's no right or wrong. I guess but for me, I think looking at your games with an engine is one of the most helpful things. At least for me, it has been. But you're probably right in that I should add more analysis without it also, just for the exercise of it, which I probably don't do enough of.
Right. My thing is, it's fine to look at it with an engine, but look at it yourself first. Analyze it yourself, see what comes to you. Try to find the moves. I like to try and find the better moves that Fritz or Stockfish or whoever is going to find. So I try to do that in advance.
And the other thing too,
find that stuff first.
The other thing too, and a lot of beginners out there should know this, when you look at an engine, and Jay, you correct me if I'm wrong here, it'll list, let's say, the first 4 or 5 choices, but those aren't the only good moves, because people get into this mindset. Oh, well, it wasn't one of the first 4 or 5 choices. Those are the optimal moves, but there are plenty of other choices that are also very reasonable. Maybe not quite as good as far as like a strict numerical assignment, but there's plenty of other choices out there. And even if you look at some chess books, they'll recommend a move that's not recommended from the engine, but that's still very playable. And, people have to, understand that just because a move is not listed by the computer, it's not necessarily a blunder, unless you actually make the move and it says it's a blunder, right? That's a different story.
Right. This is another mistake I think that amateurs make, is that they want to play the move that the engine is finding. And look, there's no way you're going to find some of these moves. What I'm saying is use the engine to try and improve your vision of the board. But don't expect you're going to be able to play like an engine, because you don't have that ability. Our brains weren't made to analyze it. We can't analyze 100 million positions a second or whatever it is. I also think in terms of improvement that lessons can be a good thing. You want to, and I don't think it's required to. Well, it depends on what your rating is. I should say that. But for somebody who's say 1200, they don't need a master necessarily to teach them. So anybody who's at least a class or 2 stronger than they are can teach that person and can improve their play and help them to see, help them to improve. So I took lessons for a brief time, unfortunately, with a FIDE master, Raphael Klofsky. So he was recommended to me by Martha Fierro. Martha Fierro is somebody, again, who I played at. Again, I'll plug them, the Marshall. So I'm pointing to my shirt again, folks. But yeah, so Martha Fierro she's younger than I am, but we were, similar ratings at the Marshall way back when. And then all of a sudden she got way better. And now I believe she has the title of WIM, Women's International Master. So anyway, so she would, we would play. I would typically, I would beat her, I think. But it was close games. And then suddenly she got, a lot better. And I said to her, and this is, I shouldn't say it was sudden. I mean, it was a process, but I said to her like a few years later, I said, Martha, how, what did you do? Because I'm always curious about people who were my strength at one time. And then all of a sudden they they go into a whole different galaxy. And she said that she took lessons with Raphael Klofsky. And so I said, okay, I'm going to take lessons with him. And I did. And he was a great teacher. He was somebody, he didn't want to inflict his openings on me or anything like that. He wanted to see what I was playing. And then he showed me variations and lines that I could play to improve, my opening play. And he was very good. It was 2-hour lessons. They were expensive. I can't say that, but it was worth it. But at the time, I didn't have a lot of money. It was, way back when. So I wasn't able to continue as long as I would have liked to have. But he was great. Klofsky would say to me, he said, Jay, you're a nice guy. You're a nice guy. I can't do his accent, but I'll try. Anyway, he said, you're a nice guy. But in chess, nice guy is not so good, So basically, so he's basically saying, that what he told me is that I played forcing variations. I played everything very set, very nicely, but there was no mystery. I never kind of allowed my opponent to go wrong. I would just play these forcing, simplifying variations. And he said, to improve, you have to go into a little bit. You have to go into the unknown, and this gets back to what is a famous quote from Mikhail Tal, who's one of my heroes. I love his play. And he said, I'll butcher the quote, but he said something to the effect of, to win, two equal opponents, when they play each other, in order for one person to win, you have to lead your opponent into a thick, wooded path from which only you can see the way out, something like that. So you have to kind of embrace the unknown, go into complications, that kind of thing. So that's basically what Klofsky said. And another a friend of mine, a master, who's played me many, many times, said, he said to me, the problem with your play is you're too passive. So, and that was very interesting. And, at first I was a little offended because I hadn't actually asked him for his opinion, but it was okay, because I said, this is actually useful. And I've tried to be sharper, which is also a word that Klofsky used. He wanted me to play sharper chess. And so since, I was hearing two very strong players say this about me, I've tried to be, I've tried to make those modifications, but I don't play that much now. So whenever, if at some point, when I retire or whatever, when I'm able to play a lot more, I'll utilize this advice. But I also think, just to finish off on this topic, is that I do think we have ceilings. So I don't think one can necessarily improve forever endlessly. I know that I have a ceiling. I'm probably pretty close to it. I don't ever anticipate, I don't see myself ever hitting 2200. I think that in order to play really very successful chess at my level, and to keep gaining points every time and never blow a game against a low-rated player, which of course will cost me 300, well, not 300, it'll cost me 30 points or whatever. In order to play chess well and to maintain my rating, I pretty much have to play chess with a clenched brain, like this, for 40 moves, roughly. And then of course, it's not just 40 moves, because on each move, you're analyzing 5 positions or whatever. So, do the math on that, and it starts to skyrocket. And I just don't think that I have the ability to do that. I can clench my brain for maybe 35 moves. I don't know, but I'm not able to do it for 40. My attention, wanes, so I just can't keep that up for, over 2 hours, 2.5 hours, whatever the game is. I start to wear out. I do the best I can, but I'm just not able to maintain the intensity I think that's needed to say, for instance, to make 2200 or to even be in that conversation.
A lot of good points there, Jay. I like what you said also about, I'm going back a little bit. I didn't want to interrupt you with the coaching, how he didn't try to change your openings and really sort of redefine you. It was more like, let's work with what you have and just fill the gaps and improve. And I think that can be hard to find in a coach. And I think if you try to work with a coach where that doesn't sync up, it can be a waste, but in your case, it worked out.
Yeah. Yeah. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah.
So Jay, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. I really appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate all the stories, all the words of wisdom for all the adult improvers out there. You've definitely had some interesting incidents there on the amateur chess scene. I'm a little embarrassed. No, absolutely. There's nothing in my experience playing in clubs even comes close to that. But, I guess most of my experience really came from just local clubs. I never really got into playing at the Marshall or, any of those clubs where a lot of these famous people cut their teeth when they were kids. But it was very cool hearing those stories. So thanks again, Jay, for coming on.
Sure, Neil. Thanks for having me, and I hope to be out at your club at some point.
Absolutely, and we'll have you back on when you write that book, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks, Jay.